Well, hi everybody. As per normal, on various screens, on my screen he's down there, but last week the other person was up there when they were meant to be down there. But hey, that's how it goes in TV land. Below, or to the side, or whatever way you're looking, is Steve McGuire. Steve
Hello
McGuire is on the show because he used to be in the band Doctor and the Medics. I remember them in the early 80s. I went to see you play in Cambridge. I think it was the Guildhall, and this was before Spirit in the Sky.
Yeah.
Literally 2 weeks later, or a month later, you're on Top of the Pops. You're number one, and I cannot believe that. That was weird. Now, what's really weird is you live less than probably 3 or 4 miles from me, and I didn't know. So, but with enough of me babbling, what's it like being number one?
Hilarious.
Okay.
Because similar to your experience, saying that you saw us at a small, a reasonably small venue, and then a few short weeks later there we were number one, and that's kind of how it was for us, all the way back to 1986. At the beginning of 1986, in January, is when we actually recorded the single at a studio called Britannia Row in Islington in North London, and the whole thing was recorded and mixed in literally a couple of days, because it was like an afterthought to the album that we were about to put out that year.
Wow.
At the heavy suggestion of the record label, they wanted an extra song for the album. So we kind of packed away all our equipment because we were about to go off on tour. So we had to use a drum machine, which we'd never seen before. We had to bring in one of the very first sampling keyboards, because they put all the strings on, and we couldn't afford orchestras and that sort of thing. So
yeah, okay.
Suddenly for a band that despised technology at the time and wanted to be dead real, suddenly we were using all the latest technology to make a single. And we recorded it in January, and then did a very cheap video made by a bunch of local media students.
Okay.
In a church hall in Putney. In a day.
Like you do.
And it was the cheapest video that the record label had made up to date, and that was back in the days when 50,000-60,000 pound video budgets were sort of normal.
Yeah.
And we sort of forgot about it. We were about to go off on tour, and then suddenly, when the record label said they were releasing it, it went from sort of a naught to in the middle of in the top 20 in like 4 weeks. Yeah, it sort of took a few weeks to get. And it was not just, and every week we thought, well, that's the highest it's going to get, and this, you've got to remember, mid 80s, we were up against, Madonna and Peter Gabriel and the House Martins, and so, and there was us, a sort of funny, really weird, underground psychedelic band, to be fair to us, at that point, we could sell out venues to our sort of underground fans, but we were completely unknown in the mainstream.
Yeah.
Steve, I grew up watching Top of the Pops.
Oh yeah.
What was it like being on Top of the Pops, and who was on with you at the time?
Well, it's quite an experience, because when the first Top of the Pops we went to, when we first got invited, our driver, we were on tour at the time, and the guy that we had driving didn't know London very well, so he took us to the wrong part of London.
Oh.
And we nearly didn't make it onto the show because we were 10 minutes late, and they're extremely strict at the BBC, as you can imagine. It's everything to the second. So we nearly didn't make it to our first one, but we got there and begged them to let us play, because we'd all got our gear on and everything. And all the dressing rooms were in right in the basement, so there were no windows, and they're quite small rooms. It kind of reminded me of like a 1950s like school or something,
Okay.
And
were you locked up in there? Was you? I mean,
you would. Your call time was something like 7:30 in the morning, which for musicians is like what time is that?
Right, yeah.
7:30 in the evening? No, in the morning. What time is that? And they would literally have almost like a minder, with a headset and a clipboard following you around, and you literally, talk about lockdown. You literally were shoved into the dressing room, and you were let out to have sort of food and water and that sort of thing, and then you'd be taken straight up to the studio to do a run through. You'd do your run through, then it'd have another run through, but in your gear, so they could work out all the camera angles, that sort of thing. And then they would bring you up for the actual show, and you had, my abiding memory is how quick everything seemed. So you go off, and, they would bring you to the side, and then you'd in those days they had 4 stages in different corners of the studio.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So as you were waiting to go on, another band was doing their bit, and actually, you'd sort of I grew up with Top of the Pops as well. From the era of glam rock back in the early 70s. I was an avid viewer, so it's always it's a dream come true, and you sort of have this image in your mind at how fantastic and sparkling Top of the Pops is, but the reality was, it's just. Yeah, it was. You just in your head, you think there are hundreds of kids there, and there's literally about about 20, and they just move them around. So the camera's literally just, you've got the stage, and then 20 kids, and then the camera. So even though it gave this impression that it was really full, actually most of it was crew people, and then they would ship the audience in.
Oh, right.
So whilst one band was playing, you were getting ready, and then they would literally shove you on. You do your 3 minutes, and then you were taken. And it was like, was that Top of the Pops? Okay. I remember we did have a dressing room next to the Pet Shop Boys as well.
Did you manage to get to the famous BBC bar?
We did. Not the first time. The first time, because they might have thought, they're only going to be here a week and never come back again.
Yeah.
but because the single kept going up, so I think we did it like, if I remember rightly, we did it about 3 times, 3 weeks in a row,
Wow.
which was, was quite unusual. And we would dress up differently every time, and they would give us like a slightly bigger stage, and that sort of thing. And the guy that was our plugger, at the time, was a guy called Oliver Smallman, and the plugger is the person. They're the one who schmoos all the radio DJs and the TV producers to get your single played and get you on the telly and all that sort of thing. And he was incredibly good. You would be taken from the studio and marched with a minder down to your dressing room and locked in there again
with a gun,
and you would have to wait for them, right to the end. Even if you were the first one on, you have to wait to the end for them to come down and say that the producer says it's clear, and no, because they would have to look back and make sure that none of the shots had dropped or the audio had gone or something.
Yeah.
In which case they would have to, bring you back up and run it again. You'd have to do it again. And then the second time we did it, our plugger guy came down, and because he knew all the producers, all the right people, he gave us a wink and said, "I've got you into the bar." So
in the bar, who did you meet? Anyone famous?
I seem to remember, and for the life of me, I can't remember what the actual actor's name is. But they just finished filming some shots for Doctor Who at the time, and the guy that was Doctor Who. And do you know what? I'm struggling to remember whether it was the guy that used to be in All Creatures Great and Small, or Sylvester McCoy at the time. It was mid-80s, and they were there in the gear because they just finished filming. So in one of the studios, so that I was certainly very excited by that. And there was a couple of newsreaders there whose names I can't remember, but they were newsreaders at the time. So it was kind of people that you'd know them to see them, but I wouldn't know what their names were. Terrible with names. But, so it's sort of famous in a BBC sense, yeah. Apart from
I
the one
was going
time.
to say, Steve, you said about obviously when you did your different appearances, you changed up the outfits and everything.
Yeah.
You had some pretty crazy get gear going, didn't you? You had some pretty crazy outfits. Where did they come from, and who decided that?
Well, the stage gear was made by one of the singers, Wendy
Wow.
West, and who actually eventually married the lead singer. In fact, they got 4 children now. And she was a dressmaker. She'd been a seamstress, previous to being in the band. She used to make clothes for a shop in Newburgh Street, which runs parallel with Carnaby Street, called the Regal, which was that was a big thing in the new psychedelic sort of amongst the cognoscenti of the new psychedelic. All the threads were made by the Regal as the place to go. All that kind of Regency, that Regency fluffy shirt thing going on, all that sort of thing. So she would make the actual stage gear.
That's amazing.
And, so she made pretty much all of it. And because she had access to sort of quite crazy fabrics and that sort of thing, so she knew where to get like really groovy stuff. Did
you have any outfit malfunctions at all whilst you were on stage? Or anything funny?
Well, there's a couple of there was a couple of it. Once we were doing a live TV show in Italy. in like a proper Roman amphitheatre. There was about 30,000 people there, yeah. And it didn't happen to me, but our singer, the wacky doc, had very, very tight trousers but with enormous flares. And he did this rather energetic sort of, scissor kick.
Yeah.
And the crotch split. And he wasn't wearing any underpants. So I'm playing away, and I noticed that he sort of turned away from the audience, kind of like, keeping his knees together. And I thought,
yeah,
there's a weird. I think it did happen to PJ Proby once on Top of the Pops. If you go back in history, that happened to him. So he had to do sort of half the. I actually had a big cloak on as well, so he just had to sort of keep wrapping this cloak around him whilst he was. But and one other time, I was bet by one of our crew to do a sound check naked and just go on stage with my guitar. We did that actually in Cambridge. We did it at one of the very posh college summer balls, the Wednesday affairs, where there's the future leaders of our country probably get their degrees from. And so we were sound checking, and I'd gone from the dressing room absolutely naked apart from the guitar on, and went on stage and acted as if this was absolutely normal. And one of the crew guys told the people that were actually there that I'd got electrocuted through wearing too much nylon once, and that I had an absolute fear of going near electrical equipment, except during a show, because I figured, well, I'm getting paid for the show, but I'm not getting paid for the sound check. So if I get electrocuted during the sound check through too much nylon, then I won't be able to claim on insurance. And they bought into that, so they thought it was absolutely. Oh, wow. Yeah, they absolutely thought, oh, fine, he has a valid reason for going on stage naked.
It's because let's be honest about it. You're remembered. I'd love to say, just for the music, but you had an image, and people remember that image. I when I was talking about saying you were coming on, I only have to say Doctor and the Medics, and people remember who you are instantly. That's the power of image. And
it's a very strange because I would I mean, I think we're probably now about two or possibly even 3 generations away from when we had a hit. So you would imagine that most, a lot of, as the generations go on, that it would, saying Doctor the Medics, you might as well say the Martians. But it is surprising just that for something which for us was a fairly sort of reasonably throwaway thing to do, just I wanted to do a cover, and took a couple of days over it, and didn't really think much of it at the time. We had no idea it was going to be even vaguely a hit. We just thought it was it's just an extra track for the album.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things that seems to have endured, even to the point where we get with a question on Cambridge's Popmaster twice a year.
Well, it's interesting. Let's just chat a little bit about that, because you were telling me the other day about before the band. So the reason the band came together was because the Doctor was a DJ. And he used to, is it the Groovy Cellar, did you tell me? Or he was, which is a kind of, after that early 80s, there was that mod sort of scene, wasn't there? And, and there was a bit of that. I mean, do you want to tell us a bit about how that all come about? Or
I certainly will tell you about that, yes.
Yeah, good man.
So Clive, the Doctor, he was called the Doctor because he was, before we had the band, he was a DJ at new psychedelic clubs, 2 of them being the Groovy Cellar and the Fantasy Attic. And at the time, he called himself Dr. Heavy Elephant Deepjoy as a DJ name. So he kept the name The Doctor, and he was actually asked to do a single by Dan Tracy from the TV Personalities, who'd started up a label called Wham Records. In fact, he had to stop calling it Wham because he got bought out. He had to because Wham, the band, started up. So they I think they said he couldn't use the same name, or even though it was spelt differently. But there was something.
I never knew that, because I now that makes sense. I didn't think about it at the time. I remember them being out on Wham Records, and because they did the Times and TV Personalities and a few things, didn't they? Yeah. So, but tell us about that first single then.
Yeah, well, he So Dan asked Clive to make do you fancy putting a single out because there was a bit of interest in that new psychedelic scene. It was starting to sort of get into the like Sounds and Melody Maker and NME and all those sort of weekly magazines. Obviously they love to tag on to, there's a scene, there must be something going on, and labels were interested. So Dan basically booked a day in the studio, and we had a 2-week window to actually write something. So he came to me, and I think I told him that I knew a couple of chords on guitar. So I went round to his flat, and we knocked out 2 songs in an afternoon. In fact, I've got the single sat over there. I might have to show it to you in a minute. And it's called The Druids Are Here, and on the B-side was called The Goats Are Trying to Kill Me. Should I go and get the single?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I have to disconnect. Hang on a second.
No. Yeah.
Maybe I'm back again. So this, I don't know if you can see that there. That's the single.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that's probably backward writing. That's the Druids Are Here. And there's the names of the band, the original band, The Doctor, Stephen McGuire, Andy McLaughlin, who was his hairdresser, if he was a drummer, and Richard Searle, who ended up in both Boys Wonder, in which I played with him in, and Corduroy.
Yeah, and there's a mod connection there as well, because Boys Wonder kind of were liked by a lot of the mods. There wasn't many mods in the late 80s. No. But they were kind of one of those little bands that our little lot liked, because we, they friends with the Acid Jazz lot, weren't they? And Matt Dayton, and who we had on a couple of weeks ago. They're all kind of.
Yes, and I tour-managed Matt when he was in Mother Earth.
Yes, yeah.
And in fact, when I was digging out singles, I found a 2-inch master tape of. I co-produced a B-side with them called "I Feel Much Better," cover version.
What, the Small Faces number?
Yeah, they did that in a studio in South London. Must have been early 90s, maybe mid-90s.
Oh, right. Like get in contact with Matt. He's such a nice guy.
Yeah, they were a nice bunch of guys. Yeah, I toured with them for probably about a year or so. It's
very incestuous, this little business.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So what did we do? Yes, we were talking about how the band, so you kind of did that. You played around. You did quite a few things, though, didn't you? You were doing like you said you were playing places where 1,200 people would turn up, and
well, after we did the single, because the idea was just to do a single and then finish, and that would be the end. It was just to sort of put something out. But we kind of figured, well, we've bothered to do a single. Why don't we do some gigs? And we had a friend who booked bands at Ravensbourne Art College. In South London, which was kind of like where all the media people would go to. It was very arty. It's like the sort of main. I think it's where Bowie went, or some of those sorts of people went there. So we did a gig there, and it went down quite well. So we thought, we'll see if we get some more gigs. And literally started off that, and just through gigging, we built up an audience. And then we also did these the magical mystery trips. I don't know if you know anything about those.
I do, because your partner told me about them. I don't remember them at the time. I'd have been 14, I think. Yeah. So probably just the wrong side of being allowed out late, shall we say?
We would do things like we used to do all-nighters at the Scala Cinema in King's Cross. We did like where we'd show films and have like 3 or 4 bands on, and it'd be like an all-nighter. And that was through the Alice in Wonderland Club, which was the, after all the sort of Fantasy Attic and Groovy Cellars, they didn't last terrifically long. But then Alice in Wonderland started up, which is with the club that Clive co-ran with a guy called Christian Paris.
Okay.
We used to get like, we used to get bands turning up there and playing, but under assumed names. Like we had Squeeze turn up, and they played under the name of Mushroom Men in the 66 Trip.
As you do.
And the Damned played down there as they did Nas No Mad of the Nightmares.
But they do that anyway, don't they? They go out as a psychedelic band. But they have we spoke about this the other day. They have this. But I must keep on with these questions, because I know I'll get distracted.
There'll be a lot of editing.
Oh yes, there will be. Yeah. You also, so you nearly played with in the Damned. So was that before Fame or after Fame, as I call it? And I don't mean that in a rude way. I just kind of
no. That was pre Spirit. When when Roman Jug joined the band, he joined as a keyboard player originally, and they did by the time they did the Phantasmagoria album, from which Eloise was the big hit single, Captain Sensible left the band under after fisticuffs and all sorts that went on.
Yeah.
And they asked me to fill in for keyboards on a couple of shows because Roman was going to move on to guitar. So I did a couple of shows with them. In fact, one of them I actually did a Tube. You remember the Tube TV show?
Yeah.
We went up there and did a show, but the track I played on never got shown. So that's my career all over. But because of that, because I'd done a couple of shows with them, I actually got called up and they said, do you want to join the band on keyboards? And this was pre-Spirit in the Sky being a hit, and because the Medics had, I was one of the original members. Sort of my loyalty was more with the Medics, because it was something that I'd sort of, they were my songs that I'd had a hand in, and I sort of felt too committed. I mean, it was very tempting because the band, Damned, one of my favourite bands. I mean, it was like a dream, it'd have been a dream come true playing with them anyway. And we got to know them because they asked us to support them on a tour. And that was probably our first big break, was going on a national tour with a band that were selling out venues every night, and there we were, the support band. So we picked up quite a lot of fans through that.
I was going to say at that time, we're going to go slightly off questions and then we'll come back, Gemma, because I just thought of a really good one. One thing. So that year, so when Spirit of the Sky is number one, what happens for the next 4 months? Is your life completely different? Are you pop-tastic? Are you Daily Mirror, The Sun?
Yes, it was. We were in this. Well, certainly. I mean, I remember at one point Clive had a double-page spread in the sort of the music section of The Sun, with a story about how he got his hair to stick up, and he reckoned that it was he made up something about he used eggs or something, and
Right.
so it's, what is that?
It's a bar alarm.
Hang a minute. You reckon?
Yeah. Have you found it, Steve?
It's just me beef joint being a bit smoky.
So, I'll ask that question again then. So, so what was it like the bit after? When the hit started being a hit, was you in the Daily Mirror? What was it like? Was that 4 months?
That was pretty full on. Yeah, like I say, Clive was he had a feature in The Sun for his hair, and I think probably the most 80s thing out of the whole thing was we got invited to Page 3 Girl of the Year night at Stringfellows. So there I am having completely, of course we were told, oh, dress up in all your gear because the press will be there.
Yeah.
So we got driven up there in a limo that the record company had got, and there's us getting out of a limo all together and the girls all dressed up and things going off.
Yeah.
And I sat next to I remember sitting at the table with Samantha Fox and Linda Lusardi.
Oh, well done.
Wow.
I think the single was in the charts for about 4 months altogether. It got to number one in 4 weeks, and it took about 5 or 6 weeks to sort of come out the charts. We were sort of in the charts for quite a while with that one, yeah. And we went to Japan and America and all sorts of places.
And did it in that respect then, did it allow you to propel you to kind of go and play those places, and you had all the screaming and the hysteria? Did that happen, or?
It did in Japan. Yeah, Japan was pretty crazy because we did a gig in a sumo wrestling arena, and especially the girl fans all tried to dress up like our girls, and they really liked it because they thought they looked like the kabuki makeup.
Yeah.
So they thought our girls were sort of were like kabuki artists or something, even if they couldn't understand what they were singing about. They liked the look of it. So we used to have a thing called Ride the Beetle, one of our songs called Ride the Beetle, where everyone would at the beginning of the song, everyone would get on their backs and wave their hands and legs in the air like doing the dying fly.
Right. Yeah.
So that was something else that I remember we did a gig at the Town and Country Club in North London, and it was absolutely sold out. And so we, before we played Spirit, we did Ride the Beetle, and the entire place was even in the seats in the balcony, people in the seats like, the back waving their legs up in the air. So that was yeah. Oh, we had an exploding Vicar as well. We got a dummy, like a shop mannequin, dressed it up as a Vicar, and put explosive in the head, and the guy doing it put too much in, and it was during Spirit in the Sky, and at a certain point they ignited it, and because it put too much, whatever it is, powder in, a ball of flame hit our drummer fully in the face, so he had to stop drumming. So, yeah,
Oh wow!
That was our foray into pyrotechnics, and I think we never bothered after that because yeah.
Gemma.
Yeah. So just talking about after this now, Steve. So since then, you've gone on to work with like many artists. Badly Drawn Boy being one of them. You were their tour manager. What was it like doing that, and how did it differ from actually being in the band yourself?
Being a tour manager is like that's you're the backroom person. You're not the person on stage. You're there to sort of make sure that person gets on stage. And I did about 11 or 12 years with Badly Drawn Boy.
Wow.
So I started working with him probably about a year after he had the Hour of Bewilderbeast album, which he won the Mercury Music Prize for, I think, back in 2000. And we toured. He was really popular all over the world. We went to America, Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, all around. Virtually every country in Europe. I'm just going. Do you think I should just shut this?
Yes.
Window, because it's going really well, isn't it? Technically.
Just got a huge reflection coming in. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's come from nowhere. I've had my blinds and curtains shut all day.
Oh, but mine. I've got
the story of my life. Anything that can go wrong always goes wrong. But there you go. But it makes it interesting. Now that's the cooker timer going off. That's I'll have to turn that off, or it'll keep going on in a minute.
But we'll have like a lot of bloopers anyway, Andy. You can
that blooper's going in. That's now that's the timer going off. That I'm cutting it into the. No, that is quite funny. Oh, bless him. He's done loads more as well. He's toured with some heavy metal acts. He's done just tons. We'll never get it. We just don't have enough time. There's loads. Sorry, so Jem was asking the question about Badly Drawn Boy, and you've got the question 13 on my list. Is the obvious, Gemma? Do you want to ask it?
Oh, I've got question 12, Andy, but if it's 13...
Hey, I'm lucky for some.
My number 12 question is, the obvious question was, would you do it all again, Steve?
Oh, absolutely, in a heartbeat. Yeah, there was. It was never planned. Nothing. A lot of bands are put together, for a specific purpose, to have hits and get popular and all that sort of thing. But with us, it was just always along for the ride. I look like I'm in prison.
Yeah. And was it like
you look fine,
it was more for the love of music and more for actually making something your own and building it from scratch, really, with the.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you're going to write mad songs with weird titles, you couldn't be in a better band. We had really kind of dedicated fans as well who they would get on trains and sleep in railway stations to get to the next gig and that sort of thing. And
wow.
And that was in the early days. That was, actually having a hit kind of, in some ways it elevated the band, in others it killed us dead because the audience that we appealed to, suddenly we went from sort of, real proper underground kind of punks, hippies, psychobillies, all sorts of kind of weird and wonderful characters that would turn up to the gigs. And then next thing we've got sort of mums and dads with their, 12-year-old daughters. And,
right.
Clive would usually ended up the gig half naked with bits hanging out and flinging himself from PA speakers. And it was like, that doesn't feel that comfortable when you've got a 12-year-old looking over you. So, so, but, it was, what a ride, it was in the middle of the 80s as well. So you were surrounded by this, pop music was pretty mad back then anyway, the overindulgence and everything, Sorry?
A crazy pop culture it was then, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, and there's some. It was pop-tastic. I mean, everybody. There's very few people now that will turn around and say, "Well, I hate the '80s."
Yeah, there were bits of it, wasn't there? I mean, let's touch on this because this is why you're here. As I said, I brought your single and I liked it, and it was like a psychedelic thing. You know what I mean? But in them days. And I'm not just saying, because all the musicians I've talked to about this, not all modern music's rubbish. It isn't. There's good music. There always is. But it's interesting. The 80s was such a disparate time. The 60s had kind of very clear sort of soul R&B and English rock. And other pop stuff. The 80s was a proper old mismatch. Like the 70s was like glam rock, then punk, and with disco in, and some disco and soul. But you can almost name the year in the 80s by the style of that year. Do you understand what I mean? It changed from two-tone to the Stone Roses.
Yeah. There was a bit of a mashup of people with different influences, and I actually think some of the music, and it did not necessarily the pop hit stuff, but there were some great bands around. There's some really good music coming out then. And some of it does get a bit overlooked these days, and some bands are really innovative. I can't even say the word. But they would mix up. They would take elements of. Back then it was. You could take you could almost live like prog rock and still be pop. You could be Marillion. You could be like a sort of almost like a Genesis sort of tribute band, but still be quite pop and still be pop-tastic. Even if you take bands like Duran Duran, they're quite electronic in their way, trying to put different styles together. I mean, look at the Human League and the things that they were doing with electronic music and still making it relevant and pop. And they were probably direct descendants of, they probably grew up listening to Kraftwerk,
Yes.
And then listening and then having sort of punk influences and that sort of immediacy of punk, and then the sort of electronic side of Kraftwerk, and putting something together and coming up with something different, but still relevant, still pop.
Totally. I totally understand. I mean, if you take Soft Cell, if you've watched like their documentary, they're an art project.
Yeah, but there were two students from Leeds, weren't they? They used to go to the Northern Soul Nights there. That's to sit back a bit to stop the sun from streaming.
Go for it, Jenna.
Steve, I'd just like to ask you about your connection with Vic Reeves. Apparently you've worked with Vic Reeves, you know him quite well.
Yes, I did, yeah. I saw him in the back room of a pub in New Cross in the early 90s, and got quite friendly with him. And this was pre, anything that he did that was recognised. And when he come to do the pilot for what became Vic Reeves' Big Night Out, he asked me to write a theme tune. So, and I knocked one up in collaboration with him. I suggested the notes and sort of thing, and he nodded when he liked the sound of it. So he wanted it to sound like a sort of a 1960s chat show sort of thing. So I knocked up something, in half an hour for him. And that became the theme tune to Vic Reeves' Big Night Out. And also at the same time, he'd had a song that he used to sing at the end of every show called "Oh, Mr. Songwriter."
Yeah.
And so he had the words, but wanted sort of chords behind it. So I come up with there's 5 chords for the song, but I got a credit for it. And so I ended up having a number 1 B-side because it was released on the B-side of Dizzy that he did with the Wonder Stuff. But on the B-side was called "Oh, Mr. Hairdresser." But because it had the same chords, I got a credit. So I've had a number 1 A-side and a number 1 B-side. So
right. which we should mention as well. You're in a band called the B-Sides now.
That's right, the B-Siders. Yes, and this is a new thing for me. I only started up last year. because I haven't really picked up this, this guitar here for quite some time and sort of gone in front of an audience and played it. Because I spent like 20 odd years working for musicians rather than trying to be one. So I've always loved B-sides. I've always thought that, that would be our little twist, is everything we did either, it could be that the rule is it either has to have been a B-side or started off as a B-side. So,
right.
For instance, I'll just chuck this one in, is Maggie May by Rod Stewart.
Was a B-side, yeah.
Started off as a B-side. And it's because the radio, when they sent the singles out, the radio DJs, of course, they'd be nosy and what's on the B-side, and they started playing that version out instead of what was the A-side, which was called Reason to Believe. And so the record label, well, it was like, oh, right, okay, well, we better put that out as the A-side. So we can still count it as a B-side if it started off as a B-side.
Oh, that's great answer.
A great theory.
That's good. Let's press stop on that one then.
The American government became very strict about giving out work visas and for anybody. Yeah. So it became the rule that if you wanted to go and tour America, you couldn't just turn up there and gig. You had to have a work permit, or they'd throw you out and you'd never get back in again. And the only way to get a work permit, they don't care who the hell you are. You have to queue up at 7:30 in the morning at Grosvenor Square. Where the American embassy. I'm not sure if it's still there. I think it might have moved, but that's where it was at the time. And you would, and they'd say you have to be there at 7:30. And then so there'd be the queue there, and they let you in, and then you had to take a ticket, sit on a seat, wait to get called up, and then there'd be some customs official would say, "So why are you coming to the USA?" "I'm coming to do a gig. I'm coming to do a tour." And they would say, "Right, we want to see the contracts, the copy of the contracts. We want to see the itinerary. We want to see where you're staying,
right,
all that stuff." And before they would stamp and let you have your visa. And that proved it to me. It's just like, it don't matter who you are. Brian May was queuing there at 7:30 to get his visa so he could go and tour America. So
wow, that's amazing.
He has his own label called Well Suspect Records. I think he has his own radio show and plays in. And Corduroy have been back gigging. They stopped for about 5 or 6 years. I think they stopped doing it, and they've just re-released an album and are back doing gigs. So I know he does that. Vom, our drummer, ended up roadieing for and then playing for the biggest punk band in Germany, who are called Die Totenhosen.
Never heard of them, but
they're the Sex Pistols of Germany. They are massive. They play all over the world and play huge stadiums, and they're not known here at all. But he lives out in Dusseldorf, and Colette is the other girl singer is she works on films as like a stand-in, kind of an extra.
Okay.
And she stands in for actresses like Gwyneth Paltrow and Kate Blanchett and
a double.
Yeah, sort of like a double, but also it's like it's more like when they set up the shots. So they have to work out the angles and the lighting. Well, they're not, Kate Blanchett ain't going to stand there for 4 hours whilst they figure out where to put her. So they get her in because she's about the right shape and size and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And her dad was an equity member, so it was a bit of a job she fell into.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And obviously Clive, the doctor, is still running Doctor and the Medics. He's got whole new members of the band. In fact, she's probably been in the band longer than the original band. And they do a lot of 80s festivals, or were doing a lot of 80s festivals. Obviously, that's been put on the back burner for the time being.
Yeah.
And the other girl singer, Wendy, with having 4 kids, all kind of spaced fairly a few years apart, she's been mum for years, and she vowed never to go on the road again. So,
so there's no one doing accounts or selling insurance?
I'm doing accounts. At the minute, I'm working for a big company sorting out invoices.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, I kind of figured that after 20, God knows how many, 25, nearly 30 years doing music, I kind of thought I just want to do something where I can go home at 5 o'clock and still get.
Oh, right. Yeah. I meant that jokingly. I didn't mean it rudely either. It's just kind of.
No. It does make the people that I work with. It does make them chuckle that I'm sitting there sorting out. What about that invoice? And they look at me and go, "Weren't you number one in the charts at one point?"
Well, is quite amusing, isn't it? Yeah. Oh, I've been recording odd bits. So we better end with, we're going to have to do some goodbyes in a second, but
Okay.
I want you to show that guitar and tell me about that guitar, because there's some guitar nerds on this show. So as well.
Okay, so this is a Fender pink Paisley Telecaster. Now this particular one I bought in 1982, I think it was. Or possibly 82 or 83, and I think they just only just come out then. And this one is the reissue that Fender did when they first licensed Fender guitars to be made outside of the USA, which was to Fender Japan. Yep. So as a sort of a kind of a thank you for licensing them to Japan, the Japanese made exact replicas of certain 60s guitars, 60s Fenders, and this being one of them. And the second I saw it, I thought, I must have that guitar. It will be mine. And you know, it's even got all the nicks and knocks of the many stages that I took down. This one I used both in the video of Spirit in the Sky itself and in the studio when we recorded it.
So that's the guitar that's on that song.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
wow.
The main guitar was this guitar through a Marshall Stack 100 watt master volume in the main room at Britannia Row with 5 microphones, different, placed and turned up to 11.
Yeah.
And I played it so I played guitar in the control room, and it was just connected into the amp, and we just turned it right up and tried to record it so that the needle was almost in the red to make it sound sort of big.
Yeah. I think that's a perfect place to end. So you definitely had it turned up to 11. So
always 11.
Right, we'll say goodbye on here, and we'll carry on talking, no doubt.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me on. I'm sorry about the interruptions of
they're comedy gold.
All my domestic appliances.
Bloopers always work.